picture the scenario for a second, right? You're standing on this beautiful, sun-drenched beach in Lahaina.
Oh, Maui. Gorgeous.
Exactly, over in Maui. The water is pristine, the breeze is perfect. But instead of just taking in the scenery, there's this totally chaotic scene unfolding right in front of you.
Okay, I'm picturing it. What's happening?
Well, there's a person standing near the water, and they are actively, repeatedly throwing rocks at a wild, endangered Hawaiian monk seal.
Oh, wow. That is, yeah, that's just awful.
Right. And this isn't happening in some quiet, isolated cove where nobody can see. There are bystanders standing right there.
Just watching.
Watching and filming the whole thing on their phones. And they are literally screaming at this person, like, what are you doing? Stop.
And the person.
They just completely ignore the crowd. They just keep throwing rocks.
Man, it is a genuinely shocking image to even, picture in your head. And the real-world consequences of that specific event, because this was a real event, were just as extreme.
Yeah, they really were.
Ultimately, that person was tracked down, convicted, and handed this massive, life-altering $70,000 fine.
70 grand! That is wild!
It is. Because, in Hawaii, it's incredibly widely known that harassing wildlife is strictly illegal. It's practically impossible to visit the islands without seeing signs or hearing those announcements about keeping your distance.
Yeah, protecting the local ecosystem is a huge deal there. And, that guy throwing rocks and the massive public outrage that followed, that's actually the opening scene of a really fascinating translated manuscript we are taking a deep dive into today.
Yeah, it's such a striking way to start a text.
It really is. It's a sermon originally given by Pastor Yasushi Nemoto at Kahului Union Church, which is also over in Maui. And I want to set the mission for you right out of the gate here.
Right, because this isn't what people might think it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even though our primary source material today happens to be a sermon, this text isn't just like a theological lecture for churchgoers.
Not at all.
What we are really unpacking today is a profound, incredibly relevant exploration of human psychology. We're looking at our deeply ingrained, almost biological tendency to jump to conclusions.
And really, the absolute limits of our own understanding, which is why starting with that seal incident is so effective.
Oh, for sure. Why do you think he chose that specific story?
Well, think about it. When you hear a news story about someone getting a $70,000 fine for throwing rocks at an endangered animal, what's your natural human reaction?
Immediate, absolute condemnation.
Right. We instantly think, what a monster. They got exactly what they deserved. It's an open and shut case in our minds.
Totally. Zero sympathy.
But the pastor uses this highly publicized event to hold up a mirror. He uses it to examine how human beings process situations when we absolutely do not have all the facts.
And he's surprisingly vulnerable about it, too. He admits that he saw the exact same news story on television that everyone else did.
And I had the same reaction.
Yeah. He caught himself going down this massive rabbit hole of speculation. He writes about how he started spinning all these intricate theories in his head.
Like trying to figure out the motive.
Exactly. He's thinking, what on earth was this person thinking? Were they intoxicated? Did they actually understand the severity of their actions?
Or, were there some completely unknown, bizarre circumstances that the news camera just isn't showing us?
Right. He essentially catches his own brain in the act of fabricating a story. He realizes, wait a minute, I know literally nothing about the internal reality of this person.
And yet, there he is, using his own pure speculation to endlessly analyze and pry into their life.
Which is such a powerful realization because we all do this constantly.
Oh, absolutely. We might not be analyzing a highly publicized wildlife crime every single day, but the text makes the case that human beings absolutely despise an information vacuum.
We hate it. We can't stand not knowing.
Exactly. When we lack concrete facts, our immediate involuntary instinct is to just fill the void.
It's so true. Let me bring this down to earth for you because reading this made me think about my own daily habits.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, think about when you text a really good friend. You send them a message, maybe asking a sensitive question or sharing some good news.
Right, you're waiting for that ping.
Yeah. And then crickets. Hours go by. A full day goes by. The read receipt is there, but there is no response.
Oh, the dreaded read receipt.
Exactly. Now, you don't actually have the facts. The only objective fact is, no response. But your brain instantly invents a narrative.
You start spiraling.
Totally spiraling. You start thinking, did I say something offensive last week? Are they mad at me? Did someone else say something bad about me to them?
It's like a GPS that loses its satellite signal,
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
It just starts frantically recalculating, drawing these wildly incorrect, zigzagging routes all over the map just to show something.
Right, because showing a blank map is too terrifying. We fabricate an entire dramatic storyline out of absolutely nothing.
That GPS analogy is spot on, and it actually ties into a deeper psychological reality. I mean, evolutionary psychology tells us that our brains are wired to prioritize survival over accuracy.
Survival over accuracy. Okay, unpack that.
Well, if our ancient ancestors heard a rustling in the bushes and lacked the information to know what it was—
The ones who assumed the absolute worst, that it was a hungry tiger, they survived.
Exactly. The ones who assumed it was just the wind. They might have been eaten. So we are biologically predisposed to take an information vacuum and fill it with a worst-case scenario.
We don't just say, I lack the data to draw a conclusion.
Never. We say, here is the most threatening, negative explanation for this silence.
Right. And the pastor actually includes this brilliant, self-deprecating joke in the manuscript that perfectly illustrates how deeply wired this is.
Oh, the pastor joke.
Yes. Even for people who are supposedly, spiritually grounded, he calls it a classic pastor joke.
How does it go again?
So he says that if a regular, deeply committed churchgoer suddenly misses a Sunday service, the pastor doesn't usually use logic.
They don't think, oh, it's flu season, maybe they caught a cold.
Nope. Or they mention they were traveling. Instead, the pastor's brain immediately jumps to the absolute worst-case scenario.
Which is?
My sermon last week was definitely too long. I offended them. They hate me.
That is so relatable. But it highlights a really serious vulnerability in how we operate.
Yeah, it does.
Because when our relationship with someone deteriorates for an unknown reason, or when a coworker suddenly acts cold, we construct a reality based on zero evidence.
Zero.
And the scary part is, we treat that constructed reality as absolute fact.
Okay, so the manuscript takes this everyday psychological habit, this desperate need to fill the void with our own narratives, and it shifts the paradigm entirely.
It takes a big leap here.
A massive leap. It moves us from these modern-day, everyday assumptions to what might be the ultimate historical example of a high-stakes information vacuum.
The crucifixion of Jesus.
Exactly. The text shifts focus to the Gospel of Luke, specifically chapter 23. And the scene the pastor sets here is incredibly stark.
It's an environment defined by total chaos and profound misunderstanding.
Let's paint that scene for you based on the manuscript. We're at a place called the Skull, also known as Golgotha. Jesus is there being crucified.
And the text specifically notes this brutal, indifferent environment around him.
Yeah, there are convicted criminals being executed right alongside him, one on the right and one on the left. Down below on the ground, the Roman soldiers are just completely numb to the gravity of the moment.
They're literally casting lots, essentially rolling dice to divide up his clothes as like a perk of the job.
Right. And in the middle of this horrific, loud, agonizing scene, Jesus speaks. He says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing."
Those specific words, "they do not know what they're doing," are the absolute anchor of the pastor's message.
Because they highlight this radical, jarring departure from how a normal human being operates in the middle of a crisis. But I really want to push back on this for a second, because this is where the text gets incredibly challenging.
Okay, go for it.
Usually when a disaster of any magnitude happens, whether it's a bridge collapsing, a company going bankrupt, or, an unjust execution, human nature demands an investigation.
We want a scapegoat.
We demand a scapegoat. We need to know, whose fault is this? Where does the buck stop? Who can I punish for this pain?
It's practically a reflex to trace the sequence of events backward to find the guilty party.
So how does this specific moment completely flip that script? Like, why isn't he pointing fingers?
Well, to understand why the script is flipped, we have to look at the massive lack of understanding surrounding that exact moment.
The information vacuum again?
Right. At the time of the crucifixion, the text points out that even Jesus's closest disciples, the people who had followed him everywhere for years, had completely scattered.
They were terrified and hiding.
And you have to ask why they were terrified. It wasn't just physical fear, it was massive cognitive dissonance.
Because things didn't go the way they planned.
Exactly. They, along with much of the public, were operating under this deeply ingrained expectation of what Old Testament prophecies about a savior actually meant.
Right. They expected a literal conquering warrior king.
Someone who was going to physically overthrow the Roman government and restore their nation's glory.
So they were expecting a military revolution, and instead they were watching a public execution. Their entire paradigm was just shattered.
Precisely. They utterly failed to connect the horrific reality unfolding right in front of their eyes with the bigger spiritual picture. They were totally in the dark.
Wow.
The manuscript makes a really profound point here. If Jesus had acted like us, if he had looked at the situation from a purely human, reactionary perspective...
Just started demanding accountability, yelling, "Whose fault is this?"
Right. If he had done that, we would never be able to see what the pastor calls God's perspective.
God's perspective. That phrase is really the heartbeat of this entire deep dive.
It really is. Because instead of demanding an investigation or tracing the blame in that moment of agony, Jesus looks at the entire situation and simply acknowledges profound human ignorance.
He sees the absolute limits of our understanding.
Yes. He recognizes that everyone involved, from the soldiers to the religious leaders, literally cannot see the full picture. Their operating systems just do not have the necessary data.
Okay, logically then, if our core problem as human beings is this fundamental lack of understanding, if we are constantly operating in the dark, acting out of fear, making terrible assumptions...
The modern human solution seems painfully obvious.
Right. We think, well, I just need to acquire more information. If I don't know enough, I should just fire up Google, read 100 articles, gather more data.
Listen to more experts until you have a perfect bulletproof understanding of this situation.
Exactly. That is the modern illusion, isn't it? The idea that if we just hoard enough data points, we can conquer our ignorance.
But the manuscript explicitly, and I mean strongly, warns against this trap.
It does, and this is where the text takes a really fascinating turn. The pastor brings up his own personal experience with rigorous higher education to illustrate why hoarding data doesn't work.
Yeah, he talks about his time in seminary.
He says people come up to him all the time in his congregation and say, "Well, you went to seminary. You spent years deeply studying complex theology, so you must have a perfect, flawless understanding of the Bible and how the universe works."
They assume his academic credentials essentially cured him of the human condition.
Exactly. But the pastor totally shatters that illusion. He admits very candidly that seminary wasn't a place where he suddenly leveled up and knew everything.
Far from it.
In fact, he says seminary was actually a place that taught him over and over again just how incredibly inadequate and tiny his understanding really was.
It didn't give him a perfect encyclopedia of divine answers.
No. It just showed him the vast borders of his own ignorance.
And he realized that approaching any ultimate truth isn't just about accumulating data. The text points out that we have this false equation hardwired into our modern brains.
Information equals understanding.
Right. We think that having access to facts is the exact same thing as possessing wisdom.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text gives you this incredibly visceral physical analogy to explain why that equation is broken.
The eating analogy. I love this part.
It's so good. The pastor compares acquiring knowledge to eating food. Imagine sitting down at a massive banquet.
Okay, I'm there.
If you just start eating and eating, pushing yourself way beyond your body's physical digestive capacity, what happens?
You definitely don't magically get healthier.
Right. You don't build muscle faster. You just get terrible, painful indigestion.
Yeah.
Your body literally rejects the excess.
It's a brilliant metaphor because it's so universally relatable. We've all been there.
And he applies this directly to how we consume information in the digital age. If you just endlessly stuff your head with knowledge gathering, fact after fact, doom scrolling through 50 news articles, bookmarking theories.
But you never actually take the time to internally digest it.
Exactly. To sit in silence with it, to examine it carefully before God, or even just your own conscience, you don't achieve enlightenment.
You just cause yourself deep mental and spiritual confusion. You get intellectual indigestion.
Intellectual indigestion. That is such a great phrase.
And it's exactly why we see so much anxiety and polarization today. We have endless access to information, but very little capacity to actually digest it.
Wow, yeah.
And the text argues that moving closer to God's perspective is not about becoming a know-it-all. It is not about hoarding enough facts so that you can win every argument on the internet.
So what is it about then?
It is entirely about achieving a very specific, quiet type of humility. It is having the strength to look at a situation, whether it is a confusing news story about a seal, a bitter conflict with a friend, or a complex geopolitical issue, and actually say out loud, I'm not seeing the whole picture here.
I simply do not know everything.
Exactly.
Let's just sit with that for a second. Saying, I do not know everything is incredibly hard.
It wounds the ego.
It really does. So we've firmly established that the text believes human beings have massive, unavoidable blind spots. We operate with limited data, and just stuffing more data into our heads isn't the magic cure.
Right.
But how does the manuscript say we should actually apply this when the rubber meets the road? Like, it's easy to be humble in a vacuum.
Sure, when you're just sitting by yourself.
But how do we apply this when we are dealing with people we actively dislike? Or people we profoundly, fundamentally disagree with?
That is the exact friction point the text addresses next.
Yeah.
It takes us back to that scene at Golgotha, back to that very specific prayer.
Father, forgive them.
Yes. The pastor asks us to really pause and analyze that sentence. When Jesus says forgive them, who exactly is included in that pronoun? Who is the them?
You know, when I first read it, my mind just immediately went to the Roman soldiers with the hammers.
Naturally. That's the immediate physical threat.
But the pastor takes it so much further than that, doesn't he?
He really does. The manuscript lists out the staggering diversity of the crowd that was present or complicit in that moment. It wasn't just one homogeneous group of cartoon villains.
So who is there?
Well, first, you have the disciples.
Wait, the disciples?
Yeah. These were the closest friends who had literally sworn they would die for him. But when the pressure hit, they broke that promise and fled in absolute terror.
So friends who betrayed him out of cowardice and self-preservation, that's a highly relatable modern conflict.
Exactly. Then you have the general crowd. The text reminds us to think about this mob.
The people watching.
Right. These are the very same people who, just the day before, were waving palm branches, cheering Hosanna, and treating him like a celebrity.
But today, swayed by the cultural current, they are screaming, "Crucify him!"
It's the ultimate fickle mob mentality.
Honestly, it sounds a lot like modern internet cancel culture. One day you're beloved, the next day the crowd demands your head, and half of them don't even know why.
That's a fantastic parallel. Then you have the enforcers, the Roman soldiers who physically drove the nails, and the centurion who was managing the execution.
The guy's just doing their job.
Exactly. These were men who had no personal stake in the theology. They were just coldly following the orders of the state. They were the ultimate, I'm just doing my job demographic.
How many times do we see that in corporate environments? People turning a blind eye to unethical behavior because they are just following the chain of command.
Right, it happens every day. And then, crucially, you have the religious leaders.
The Pharisees, the Sadducees.
Let's pause on them for a second because they were just random bad guys. These were the highly educated religious academics of their day.
They were the experts.
They were absolute sticklers for the rules. They had memorized the scriptures, but their rigid obsession with maintaining their own power and their specific interpretation of the law made them completely blind to the truth standing right in front of them.
They orchestrated the entire execution thinking they were the righteous ones. So you have cowards, hypocrites, blind followers, and arrogant experts who think their knowledge makes them superior. That covers almost everyone.
Almost. Because then the text delivers the final ultimate inclusion. After listing all those historical groups, the pastor writes, and ultimately that them includes all of us.
Wait, all of us? That's a tough pill to swallow.
It is.
What does this all mean for you listening to this right now, dealing with your own daily conflicts? The text points out a really uncomfortable truth about human nature.
That we always want the other person to change.
Yes. When we are in a disagreement, or when we look at someone on the completely opposite side of the political aisle, or even just a coworker who constantly undermines us, our burning wish is always, if only that person would change their mind.
If only they could just see things my way.
Right. If they understood that I am right, this whole problem would evaporate.
And the pastor is very careful to say that it isn't inherently evil or wrong to want people to understand your perspective, especially when you strongly believe you are advocating for the right thing.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the text argues that relying solely on this very limited, self-centered desire is dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Because it completely ignores the vast, unseen reality of the other person's life. It ignores their hidden pain, their complex childhood backgrounds, their quiet, psychological weaknesses.
And the internal conflicts that only God can truly see and understand.
Exactly. We only see the surface.
Just like we only saw a guy throwing a rock at a seal on the news, we only see the frustrating behavior of our coworker. We don't see the rest of the iceberg.
That's it exactly. And this leads directly to the final core takeaway of the manuscript. It is incredibly important to remember the real-world context of this text.
Right, the setting where this was preached.
Yeah, it was originally delivered as a message for a giant cross-denominational prayer meeting in Maui.
So you have people from all these different church backgrounds, different traditions, all sitting in the exact same room.
Yes. Believers who, despite sharing a core faith, have very different theological backgrounds, different political leanings, and different cultural values.
They probably disagree on a whole lot of things.
Definitely. And the pastor's synthesized message to this diverse group is a profound call to action. He says that instead of just praying or wishing for others to change to fit our specific mold,
Or just praying for our external problems to be magically fixed by someone else.
we must add a crucial, humbling caveat to our internal monologue.
And that caveat requires a complete shift in focus. The text says we need to start asking, Lord, open my eyes first. Correct my biases. Give me just a little bit of your perspective so that I can find a way to love the people that I currently feel are impossible to love.
Because if we accept the fundamental premise of the text, that we are all, every single one of us, part of the them who lack full understanding,
Then it suddenly becomes safe to admit our own blindness.
yes, it removes the exhausting pressure of having to be right all the time. It allows us to view the people we disagree with not as enemies to be defeated, but as fellow humans operating with the same broken GPS that we are.
Which brings us right back to where we started today. We open this deep dive talking about a shocking news story, a massive fine, and our immediate biological instinct to judge a situation with absolute righteous certainty.
But the text we've explored today completely dismantles that certainty.
It really does. It reframes our lack of knowledge. It tells us that not knowing everything isn't a weakness to be hidden, and it isn't a void to be filled with speculative gossip.
It is actually the starting point for genuine empathy.
So I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your week.
A great way to wrap up.
A thought that builds directly on what we've uncovered in this manuscript. If this text proves anything, it's that human beings are constantly operating with severely limited information and incredibly deep blind spots.
We truly are.
So, what if the next time you feel absolute 100% certainty about someone else's negative motives, what if you treat that absolute certainty not as a concrete fact, but as a giant flashing warning sign that you are actually missing the bigger picture?
Man, that is a phenomenal question to sit with.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep digging, and never stop questioning your own assumptions. We'll catch you next time.